Well, today this is going to be an interesting conversation. We are going to take a deep dive into the downturn and maybe downfall of the Toronto condo market and all the legal and financial repercussions that are now falling out as a result in real time. Today we have a good friend of Fox Marin, Mark Morris. Mark has been a lawyer for over 20 years, and you can find Mark at legalclosings.ca. By way of background, Mark has been a fountain of knowledge for all things real estate law for myself, for Fox Marin, and for all of our clients. And to note, and Mark, I got this off your website, so if I'm missing anything, let me know. But Mark has been a regular instructor at the Ontario Real Estate College. He's Experts Rising Star Award, not sure what that is. Canadian Lawyer's Most Influential Lawyer Award, and Financial Times, I love this one, Maverick and Mover Award. In addition to the previous firms that Mark has co-founded, legal firms has co-founded, he's also won the Financial Times Innovative Lawyers Award and Canadian Business Startup 50 Award. So Mark, so great to have you here today. And I think you are the perfect person to talk about what you're seeing from your side as the fallout to what's going on in the condo market. Mark, great to have you here.
Terrific. And I will apologize. I'm somewhat in more casual garb today, but you guys, you'll forgive me, please, Ralph.
We'll take you any way we can get you, Mark.
Yeah, I'm doing construction in the background, so that's my excuse. What can I tell you?
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I really want to get into what you're seeing on your side of things a little bit further downstream from us with the fallout of the condo market.
First off, thanks for having me on. I'm a big fan of your brokerage, as you are well aware of the competencies and professionalism that you bring. It's always a pleasure speaking with people who I feel not only are asking questions, but also have a firm grasp and are in the middle of things themselves. And to be clear, we're in the middle of things. There's no question about that. We are currently in the downturn that, I guess quite a few of us were able to see coming. And I'm not saying that in a sort of sanctimonious way. When I say quite a few were able to see it coming, that's similar to really any bubble. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have partaken in the bubble. After all, the essence of a bubble is you can make a lot of money in a bubble. You just need to know when to get out. And truthfully, while many of us thought that we were in a bubble, many of us didn't know when it was going to pop. And that's really when the genius of the thing happened. But the bubble has now definitively popped. And we are in a lot of problems. And perhaps it's worthwhile us just going into the history for maybe 2 or 3 minutes of how we got into this mess to then determine where we are presently and how it may play out in the coming years. Really, real estate values have been rising significantly since about 2006. And when I say significantly, I mean greatly above Canadian incomes, to the point where you now need 12, 15 times whatever it is Canadian income in order to afford a basic house. And so prices have largely divorced themselves from Canadian incomes. Fine, that's a reality that we all knew about. But that reality existed in 2012 as much as it did in 2021, maybe not to the same degree, but there it did. Having said that, this was all put on steroids, really post-COVID in particular. 2019 saw the government acting scared, and the M2 money supply increased by 25%, which means in English that 25% of the dollars that were just basically made, there was quantitative production of dollars such that suddenly Canadians were sitting on 25% more cash than they had the year before in aggregate. And Canadians, being Canadians and being fairly conservative, we don't have an incredibly dynamic economy as compared to these states, chose to put it into real estate. And it pushed up asset values massively. The easiest place to invest in real estate is, of course, new build construction. And as a result, the bubble was most acute in new build construction, and particularly condos, where builders were only able to make things pencil by putting ever smaller projects together, such that you have things like The Good and other condos that basically sold with 320, 330 square feet, which is just an unlivable amount of space for anything more than perhaps a single student storing a set of skis. And so we entered into a scenario where prices were totally and utterly insane, approaching $1,400, $1,500, $1,600 a square foot in metropolitan areas like Toronto as we kind of hit the 2022 mark. And of course, it didn't stop people from buying them. Taxes on it were huge as well. Governments were kind of pushers in this scenario where at the end of the day, they raised development theories to the roof, forced builders to produce ever smaller products to make these things pencil. And these prices were required, but the prices were never functionally grounded in reality because they were always massively divorced from income. And the only reason that they continued afoot, the only reason that really from 2017 onward that anything sold was because everyone kind of recognized that they could take advantage of the bubble that had been created. And again, the thing about a bubble is you can make a lot of money in a bubble as long as you get out beforehand. So everyone was basically saying, I don't really care what the cash flow fundamentals of this property are. Even if I lose money, I'm going to sell it for a capital gain. And if I get that capital gain, then I come out a winner. And real estate hasn't crashed in 20 years. Why would it crash now? And so we had a bunch of amount of people who kind of went in, and the vast majority of product and the height of bubble really took place after the M2 money supply went nuts. So 2020, 2021, 2022, which is when things started to turn. Now, you may wonder, why did I go into this history? What was the point? Well, the reason I went into the history is because the only way we are going to get out of it is by understanding that history. Because after all, the construction time of a condo is 5 years, 5 to 6 years. What that means is that the product from 2020 is finally hitting the market. That is to say, people are now being forced to crystallize on the purchase price that they signed for in 2020. Next year, it'll be 2021, and the year after that, it'll be 2022. In other words, it's going to get worse before it gets better because the product and the condos that are closing today have ever higher prices as we approach the 2020-22 condo signing period. And there are more and more people who are looking at the basic math and saying, I don't want any part of this. I'm leaving. I'm not concluding my deal. And that brings us to the present day. So we've dealt with the past. We're going to deal with the present day, and then we'll talk about the future. So present day, where are we? Well, we're in a scenario where there's a whole bunch of condos that are closing now at $1,400 or $1,500 a square. They come across my desk every single day. But the market value for those products are $900 to $1,000. Now, if you think about it, usually if a builder is anywhere near decent, they've taken a 20% deposit. But even with that $20,000 deposit, if say you bought $1 million condo, you've put down 20%, that's $800,000. You're still going to be underwater by $150,000 if you close. And crystallizing a loss that way is often unpalatable to people. And that is the reason that about 25% of people who are closing these products are now walking away. Now, that's not a stat that is being published by the builders. Obviously, it's not in their interest to publish it. In fact, it's largely anecdotal, but I do have it on decent authority that that's the way, that's what the numbers are. And I can share with you why it is I know those numbers.
Please do.
Quite interesting.
Please do.
It's because I've made a name for myself in this default world where I attend shows like yours and others. And as a result, a lot of people approach me. Well, one group of people that have approached me, quite a few people, groups of people have approached me, have been listing agents for builders. So generally, when a builder is going to sell a product, they appoint one single listing brokerage, and that listing brokerage sells all the products. The reason that these agents have approached me is because these builders that are often sizable builders are coming back to them and saying, hey, you know how we've paid you the first tranche of your commissions? We want them back. And we want them back for 25% of the amount that we paid you. Significant amount of money. But that directly is indicative of the fact that 25% of the deals that they had didn't close. And if this was one project, that would be something. But honestly, it's been about 4 or 5 at this point.
And are you talking about marketing companies that had represented the developers?
Marketing companies, or more importantly, if someone, usually it's not a marketing company, usually it's a real estate brokerage that represents, like a Baker. Baker has approached me, to be clear. Like nothing, I'm just using them as an example. Like Baker or something else, they are a real estate brokerage. They are paid commissions. And the commissions are then being clawed back.
Okay.
And
so on the exclusive broker side, not on the co-op side.
Exactly. So we have it on pretty good authority that we're now at about 25%, if not higher. And I expect it to go higher because after all, the math is really just not there. And to be clear, that then brings my current day reality into sharp relief Because my current day reality is basically spent all day long explaining to people what it is like to breach an agreement, which is where this conversation is scheduled to go. After all, it's not illegal to breach an agreement. To be clear, a lawyer can't tell you. You call up a lawyer and scream, "My wife is pregnant and I need to travel 101 kilometers to get to the hospital." A lawyer is not allowed to advise you to travel 101 kilometers down the highway. There's a law that says you can't do it. It's illegal to do it. And it might not be a criminal offense, but it's still against the law to do that. It's illegal to trespass. It's illegal to hit someone. It's illegal to murder someone. It's illegal to do these things because the legislature has said it's illegal to do it. But it's not illegal to breach a contract. There's no statute out there that says you can't breach a contract. There are consequences, to be sure. There's definitely consequences, but it's not illegal. And because it's not illegal, a lawyer can advise. It's allowed to advise on breaching a contract. A lawyer is not allowed, by the way, to advise someone to shelter their assets in anticipation of someone coming after you. That is against the Fraudulent Conveyance Act. That's creditor. There's a whole range of, there's two particular pieces of legislation that the Ontario government has passed that says you're not allowed to move assets or shelter assets in order to evade future creditors. So a lawyer cannot tell you how to position or shelter your assets. But what a lawyer can do is they can tell you about your two options: choosing to close or choosing to breach. Because after all, breach is a tactic similar to closing, similar to a VTB. It's just a tactic. And in order to actually figure this out, you need to understand the math that underlies both of those decisions. And more importantly, you have to understand how the litigation is likely to play out and whether you have the appetite for that litigation, because some people just plain don't. Particularly given how many people have been signed up to these agreements. Often it's not just you, it might be your wife, it might be your parents, whatever it is. And is everyone ready to go through that? All of these analyses kind of have to be brought to bear. But what I spend a lot of my day doing is first I give them a copy of a video, because I've done out this video because I have to have this call so many times that I did out a video for people so that they can watch it. And then I say, if you have questions after you watch this video, you're welcome to book a time. And invariably 2 or 3 appointments in my day are scheduled around someone sitting there saying, "I can't close, what do I do?" And then we have to go through this analysis and we have to say, all right, so let's do this. What was the purchase price? What's the sale price in today's market? To which, by the way, Ralph, they always say, "I don't know." And you say, of course you do, because if it was worth 1.5 times what you paid, you'd be closing. And you're well aware that it isn't. So you know that it is roughly there. Give me a number. It's amazing how much everyone knew what the value of their product was as it was going up, but no one knows what it is when it's going down. Human nature. Anyways, so you basically say, "Thank you very much. Tell me, how much did you pay? How much in deposits do you have? What's it worth right now?" Okay. Well, if that's the case, let's add on a couple of extra costs. We go through the carrying costs and everything else. And this is what the builder may very well sue you for. Actually, they may sue you for much more. Builders routinely sue you for a lot more than they can get for 2 reasons. One, because there's no harm in asking for more. You can just do the damages later on, but also because a lot of people put their heads in the sand when they get sued, and then the builder gets default judgment because you just haven't fought back because you think that you're wrong. When understanding that there's a twofold process to litigation. One is the actionable wrong, where you have to prove to the court that you did something wrong, which isn't really that hard with an agreement of purchase and sale that you don't conclude.
Right.
You breached a contract. But the second part is the damage claim. Second part is being able to say, well, okay, and therefore I get the following damages. You're allowed to challenge those damages. And once you challenge the damages, it usually comes down to somewhere reasonable, and reasonable being the differential between what they have collected already by way of deposits and their sale price, plus their reasonable holding costs, interest costs, whatever it is. And so once you figure that out, you're basically able to say, okay, the builder is likely to come after you. They'll come after you for more, but once we're actually talking, it's going to be this. And by the way, there will be settlement opportunities throughout that litigation process where you may actually be able to cut it in half and just say, here's some money, please go away. And there it is. Versus the true and very definite costs that will accrue if ultimately you proceed forward, including, of course, your land transfer tax, which isn't part of a damage claim, because whoever takes on a purchase is going to pay your adjustments, your commissions to sell the property because you're going to hold on to it for 6 months and get rid of it, your interest cost of a private mortgage for 6 months, and all of these things. And so you do an analysis on a spreadsheet of closing versus not closing. Not closing has more potential variability insofar as you don't know what the builder's going to do, if they're going to sue you, if they're going to sue you for a lot more, if you're going to be successful at the damage claim, how much they're going to resell for, all of these variabilities. But you do out your analysis and then you go with one of the two avenues and then you roll your dice. Now, there are ways of bettering your dice roll, to be sure. And that's part of what I talk to clients about as well. I'm sorry, I'm speaking a lot here, but I think I'm just getting to the essence of what it is you want to speak about, Rowan. Part of bettering your odds, or explaining to the builder that you are an end user, not an investor, explaining to the builder that true circumstance and pity is warranted in a given instance. I'm not suggesting lying to the builder, by the way. I'm saying if you really have this type of story, like, hey, my dad came down with cancer and he was a signatory and I was buying this for my dad. I just had that scenario. Truly, here's the doctor's notes. And why are you doing that? You're doing that not because you're going to get your deposit back, but because you're hoping that the builder, and most of them are really good people, look at this and say, yeah, there's a true sympathy story here. Part of my challenge is I get I get a lot of people who come to me every single day, and I make it a point of only telling the truth to builders. I don't exaggerate. I don't mislead. When I say to a builder I have a sympathetic story, because there's only a couple of builders lawyers, I make it very clear to them that I'm not BSing them, that I'm coming to them only with the true sympathetic stories, because that way there is credibility behind your words. And I would strongly suggest that anyone that's in this scenario do the same. But that's pretty much how this is playing out. And so if you're wondering, my days are consistent of endless hardship. I expect that this will continue through to 2027 when the 2022 product finally comes up. After that, we'll have whole new projects and cycles and problems that we can already see arising, but that's for a different show. And I suspect that the builders are going to themselves take on increasingly different tacks, because at some point it actually becomes the builder's problem, not just the buyer's problem. And the builders themselves, if enough of them start defaulting, it becomes the bank's problems. Remember, these are all non-CMHC insured mortgages, right? Keep that in mind. These aren't mortgages yet. And so it becomes a general problem in our economy. That's what I would say as a first long-winded preliminary rant.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. Sounds pretty friggin' awful. We're somewhat sheltered from it, even though we are very active in the real estate market, in that the biggest fallout we're seeing on the resale side is just generally telling people who traditionally would sell their condo and move up the property ladder that they can't sell their condo and they're stuck in their condo, and they're going to have to wait a couple of years minimum before they can take that move from a condo into a freehold. And so we're seeing a lot of people stuck in their condos as a result of the current climate, because the equity isn't there for them to sell and traditionally move up that ladder. And so we're having a lot of those type of conversations on the resale side. Pre-construction, it's interesting because while we have been somewhat active over the years in pre-construction, we've always been really clear with our clients to inform them that this is a very long-term strategy if it's something that they want to get involved with as an investment, meaning that they should be planning to hold for a minimum of 3 to 5 years, and it's not a quick flip, and it's not easy money, and it must be thought out long term. So we haven't had any clients, at least as of yet, knock on wood, that have had this issue in terms of not being able to close or having to default. However, we've started getting phone calls from people reaching out to us who didn't buy through us, who didn't really understand what they were signing at the time they signed these agreements, and just thought it was kind of like a get-rich-quick scheme. And these are the ones that seemingly are now reaching out to us, and I'm sending them your way. And one of the things that I was so shocked with as I sent one your way is seeing that you went to all the trouble to make a video to address this in advance. And it was quite shocking to me, because I started to really think about how many of these phone calls you're getting and what you're seeing. And that's one thing I just want to drill down a little bit more on, because there's no database, there's no stats, there's nothing in the media. I'm not really seeing it very much. You're very much on the front line of it. So like, I just want to dig in a little bit more. Like, how bad is this? And like, how can you help put this in context to anybody who's watching this in terms of what is happening right now as these tens of thousands of condo units are closing and going to be closing for at least the next year to year and a half?
It's terribly bad. So within a segment of real estate. So to be clear, the new build segment is a small segment, but it's a segment that is relative to the resale. But it is a segment that is experiencing acute pain, and systemically so. First off, I made that video not to be good, but rather to save myself time.
Yeah.
Because that is truly, like, it's just taking countless hours. I see it, myself and other lawyers see it as a sort of duty. It's a way that we can give back to people who are in real problems. And to be clear, a lot of people tut people who are in this position. A lot of people sit there and say, well, you should have known better. It obviously was a bubble. You're getting your comeuppance. I can't tell you, that cesspool of brilliance, Twitter used to be so much better, but it's now really, it fosters negativity and revenge. If you put out a negative comment, generally that gets a lot more likes than positive ones. And a lot of the negativity is people are getting what they deserve. Well, the truth is that we've all been 20, we've all been 30. We've all had obligations to our family. And every one of us, and at least those people who are not born into the laps of luxury and wealth, have to take risks and have to ultimately invest. And really the safest way to invest in Canada over the past 70 years has been real estate. And there's only really been two vehicles for investment, to be clear. One is the stock market. Some people aren't happy with it. Now there's the other market is real estate. And to that end, those people who borrowed from their HELOC and took 3-4 deals, way more than they could ever afford or even contemplate closing on. Sure, we could tut them, we could poo-poo them. But every person who's ever become wealthy has taken risks. This was a measured risk. They did it on the back of their HELOC. And they did so because, if I'm to be very blunt about it, and just looking at this problem holistically and systemically, Canadian incomes are crap. They absolutely are. We don't have, and this isn't just Canada. This is Europe. This is a lot of the Western world outside of America. We don't have very vibrant economies. I built a business once that had 73 full-time employees. I'm not even going to use that business. I'm going to use a different one. I represented someone who had a business that generated 4 million NOI net every year. Restaurant business, of all things. Restaurant, to do that is astounding. But it's a very large restaurant chain that you would know of. It's very impressive. And one day he came to the bank and he said, I'd like to borrow money, please, against my income sheet, which is 20 years old at this point. And you know what the bank said to him? You can guess. You know what they said? They said,
yep,
you can go screw yourself. What real estate assets can you put up? I said, I don't want to put up real estate assets. I'll put up my cash flow. And they said, no, we're not lending against that.
Yep.
And that's true of really anything you want to do in this world. Like you are not able to go ahead and start a business and fail in Canada in the same way that there's vibrancy to do so in the States. Yep. And so because we don't have the vibrancy, because we don't have the financial backings from our banks, because we don't have any of these things, what is a young family that is looking to provide? What is a young father or mother that is looking to provide for their family and take the risks that so many people take in their 20s and 30s to do? Well, logically, they made a fairly safe bet. Certainly safer than opening up a restaurant chain or starting up a business with 73 full-time employees or anything else. It makes a lot more sense to just actually invest, and that they over-invested, and it's just called leverage. And people are applauded for that in the financial world and in the business world all the time. Why in the world shouldn't these people do it? And now the fact that we're tut-tutting them and poo-pooing them for a risk that every one of us who is successful has taken in a different sphere seems to me to be the height of hypocrisy. Now, don't get me wrong. That's not to say that the government should be intervening in any way, shape, or form. Risk is risk. They took a risk. They're in a market downturn. They will suffer from this. But that doesn't mean we can't be compassionate to that risk. It doesn't mean that we can't look at this and understand it. And more importantly, when someone comes to me and says, I have 5 deals that are on the go, instead of saying, boy, you're an idiot, instead saying, yeah, I understand. You were at the point in your life where look, I'm 50 years old now, Ralph. I mean, like, my bikini body is gone for this summer. It's not going to be pretty on the beach. Like, that's it. It's done. I'm 30 years past. I've taken my risks. But had you chastised me for taking my risks when I was in my 20s, it would have been totally unfair. That was my time to do it. And other people have done the same thing in real estate. And we should at least be cognizant of the fact and not blame them for choosing to do what they could to make sizable investments and place their chips. That it came up red and they placed on black sucks. And now we're dealing with that. So to answer your question, because this is a long-winded way of doing this, the problem is huge. Many, many, many people place the bets. Those people that did place the bets used generally their HELOCs and their previously accrued gains in real estate in order to do so. Many, many people will be making consumer proposals. One way to actually track what's going on is in an aggregative sense to start tracking the consumer proposals that are being made, which are rising fast. And consumer proposals, the superintendent for bankruptcy does track what the primary reason is for this. Real estate, I'm not sure if they're the ones who track it or if it comes from the trustees themselves, but what I'm hearing from the trustees is that it's almost all related to real estate exposure. That will be augmented, of course, by job loss because the orange monkey south of us continues to not understand the basic understanding of a win-win scenario vis-a-vis tariffs. And if you think about it, and you want to suggest, Ralph, what city most benefited from the condo boom? You want to take a guess?
In Toronto.
No, Hamilton. Hamilton is when values went up the fastest. Hamilton is also where our steel industry and our car industry is located. It's where the tariffs are going to hit the hardest. The west end of Toronto is going to experience and west of Toronto is going to experience a crushing dynamic that is both born of real estate exposure, but also job loss. And all of these things are culminating around the drain and creating really what is a virtuous circle that is going to suck a lot of Canada's vibrancy down the drain for the next year or two, meaning that this situation is going to get worse, not better. We are in for what is a classic recession, if not worse, for some time. And that means that these discussions will continue apace. And it means that it's going to affect ever greater segments, including the resale segments of the market, because at the end of the day, particularly with real estate assets, they are sold at fire sale prices. When in aggregate, multiple people start defaulting, you don't get power sale deals during a strong market. A power sale sells for the same price as anything. Power sales start to become significantly discounted where there is a supply-demand mismatch. And at the end of the day, the bank has the authority to keep on lowering the price, given that there are no buyers. That dynamic is going to start playing in as we see power sales start in as well. And that's going to further weaken the ability to force yourself and get rid of product, creating, again, this spiral that will inevitably get worse as we head towards 2027. We'll probably emerge in 2029 or so, 2020, 30, but it is going to be some time. And you'll note that pretty much coincides as well with the end of Orange Monkey's term, which is a bit of a coincidence, but probably is a fortuitous one at that.
Well, thank you for that rosy picture that you painted, but I appreciate the candor. One of the things that you said in your video talking about the compassionate side of this that I thought that spoke to me as I watched that video that you sent to somebody who was in distress, who reached out to me, is that you're not alone and that you're not the only person, and you were looking right in the camera, talking to people. And I can only imagine how alienating being in this type of position would be, especially if you have your life savings tied up into what you thought was a good investment. And I think one of the things that happens is, especially in the media, is people tend to get demonized as investors. But a lot of these investors were very much mom and pop people who were just trying to find a way to get ahead in an economy where it is nearly impossible to do so. And so I think having compassion for these people and not demonizing them as investors is really, really thoughtful for you to say. And I think it's appropriate just given what we have seen in terms of who these people actually are and some of the conversations we've had that we've in turn sent your way. In terms of talking about the default versus close decision tree, how many people, again, this is just an anecdotal question, but how many people are choosing to walk away versus moving forward once you've laid out all the information?
It's incredibly hard for me to give you an answer. I want to get back to the first thing you said about compassion in a second, but it's incredibly hard. I want to answer your question directly. I should not be the person who answers that question. And the reason I shouldn't is because I have a public profile in these types of calls.
Right.
I am seeing an overwhelming number that is not proportionate to what other lawyers are seeing in this area. So I'm going to be guarded in telling you anything other than the 25% stat that I have for the reasons that I expressed it.
Right.
I don't know what others are seeing, but I can tell you it's an endless conversation in my office at this point, just endless.
Must be exhausting.
It is exhausting. It is exhausting, but listen, a lot of things are exhausting in this world. Truthfully, real estate has given me a very good career for 20 years and has made me, functionally who I am and given me the wealth and the knowledge and everything else. And so it's paid forward for 20 years. Now it's time for us to pay forward as lawyers and help people as best we can. I just want to talk about one thing to do with compassion that has nothing really to do with this particular cycle, but has to do with just being a lawyer. Being a lawyer gives you a very particular vantage point into the world. The truth is, everyone who's gotten divorced, because that's not something that can be hidden. And as a result, people just admit, I've gotten divorced. Whether they're ashamed of it or not, they have to admit it publicly. But people don't admit that they're bankrupt. And yet, there are so many people who go bankrupt or make consumer proposals because they don't need to make that analysis. They don't need to actually say that directly. And similarly, people don't admit that they're in debt. They drive around in BMWs and they drive around in God knows what. But actually, one thing that would be really nice is if we had like a matrix sort of style view of the world where you could see a car, not for its emblem that's on the back, but rather with the debt levels, because the only true people who actually are wealthy are those people who are not sitting there with any numbers associated with their cars. And yet everyone has them. And when you start talking to people, you understand exactly how disparate and depleted Canadian bank accounts are. And to be clear, that is a significant factor. So if you're asking how bad is the pain, well, the pain is bad because we came into this with almost nothing in our wallets. The Canadian economy is on very, very, very wobbly legs. The Canadian consumer is indebted up the wazoo, and very few of us have savings on which to fall back on. We are in a scenario where compassion is not only warranted, it's mandated, because there but for the grace of God goes I.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. And I think that's one thing, especially just coming out of this election, that compassion is something that I think we've lost a little bit. And it's a really, really good reminder that there's more to it than just evil investors and evil developers and greedy people. These are just average people, normal Canadians, just trying to find a way to progress in a system that's really been holding them back. And that's how people got caught. And it's very difficult to time any market. And there's people who are getting burned. And I think the larger question is how big of a contagion is this going to be, and what are the effects of this going to be, and the orders of magnitude. And that's pretty much impossible to predict, but it does seem like this is going to take a while to play out.
I agree with that. And you know what? The only thing that we can really do collectively is continue to have compassion, continue to dialogue, and understand that collectively we're in this together. There will be brighter days ahead. We just have to get there.
How are developers responding to these type of situations? Every developer, every situation is different, but like where is it going? Because it's how the developers respond and how they're positioned to weather this storm that I think will really help dictate how this plays out with so many people under duress.
Yeah, developers aren't bad people. The problem is developers themselves are now at a point where defaults are affecting their abilities to operate. And they,
Right.
of course, have their own obligations to their own staff. Like
Yeah.
we're talking about development firms that have 35 full-time employees as well. And, it's all well and good that you want them to show you compassion, but they also have to meet payrolls and they're not bad people. In fact, some of the larger builders that I speak to are very blunt with me. They're like, look, where there's true cases for compassion, we'll try to do what we can do. They'll offer BTBs. Some of them have offered small price reductions. They'll do what they can do, but at the end of the day, they're as trapped in this vortex as anyone else. They have committed to this project. And in the absence of a purchaser that purchases the product, they are stuck with that product. And if that product isn't producing cash flow because rents are falling and because there's a lot of excess product that's now hitting the market, well, then what the devil are they going to do for their employees? And so they have to balance, even if they have compassion, they have to balance that compassion as against their basic balance sheet. And it's getting increasingly hard to do as the default rates rise. So to a degree, an individual default, we can ask, is there compassion from the builder? Collective defaults, it starts becoming a builder problem where they enter into survival mode. And at that point, they have to do everything they can to collect by virtue of necessity, no matter what they're thinking. And so we're really entering into that stage of the process where builders themselves are starting to feel it, and their actions are being dictated by more than simple compassion or vindictiveness, but rather by dire necessity, born of their sunk costs in their organizations.
And are you expecting to see developers start to
Yes.
go under?
The developers are going under, but when they go under, it's not necessarily public. Going under could be a lender that takes over a position, doesn't need to be public. It could be being bought out for X on the dollar. Sometimes it's Kingset that moves in and then bankrupts you, but that's not usually although Kingset has a tendency to do that, Van Dyke and a whole bunch of others.
Yeah.
That's not usually what it is. Usually it's behind the scenes, but no, it's definitely the case that there are a whole range of builders that are in trouble. We are getting back, if any of your viewers take business courses, we're getting back to a place where cash is king. And that's true for developers as well. You can hold assets, you can hold land so long as they're performing assets and performing land. That is to say that there's tenants on them. In the absence of cash flow, speculation is no longer the king. Those people who were speculating on land grabs that didn't have large cash reserves, those are the ones that are most likely to experience significant cash calls and downturns. And that's what we're seeing. That's why we're seeing Pace go under. That's why we're seeing Van Dykes go under. That's why we're seeing the Addy developments, although they have their other issues on the. We're seeing these mid builders, these builders that drove around in BMWs and said, "Look at me, I'm the flashy new king on the hill." But ultimately, we're still acquiring assets and we're speculating and taking the same risks that person who bought 5 condos was buying, but they were doing it in the commercial space. Those are the people who are really going under and are being subsumed by events. And are finding their positions being taken out by others, though not necessarily in a public way.
It's interesting. It reminds me when you're talking about the BMWs of the quote by Warren Buffett, where the tide goes out. When the tide goes out, that's when you see who's not wearing a bathing.
Swimming naked. That's exactly correct. Look, a lot of us were swimming naked, but the good news is,
not all of us have dad bods.
That's right. I mean, hopefully we'll emerge from this having had a good experience.
and on your side of the closing side, what about blanket appraisals from some of the lenders? Are you seeing that?
Yeah, I am seeing that, but I don't know how much longer that's going to last. So blanket appraisals to me are the ultimate form of corruption. And the reason they're corrupt is because the reason blanket mortgages are there is specifically not for the benefit of purchasers.
No.
It's actually for the benefit of the banks.
Yep.
The banks have largely extended a mortgage or a construction mortgage to a given builder. When they extend the mortgage to a construction builder, they are in hawk, and it's not CMHC insured. The way to get out of that mortgage is to ensure that other people could complete their purchase such that the construction mortgage is taken out. RBC, as an example, would far prefer to have 100 people who have small mortgages predicated and insured by
Yes.
CMHC, then they would one single construction mortgage to a given developer. And so I see blanket mortgages as the banks trying to deleverage their exposure as opposed to actually helping consumers.
For
That
sure.
this has now been pointed out in two articles, one in the Toronto Star and one in the Globe and Mail, to
Yep.
my mind means that OFSFRI, which is the the bank's regulator, should be cracking down on this. But to date, they haven't, because this is Canada and we are loath to crack down on anything. We'll see where this goes. I would be very surprised if, particularly as we hit 2027, if blanket mortgages were still being extended on certain projects.
Right. But it's a way for the banks to spread out their risks.
That's right. It's to
amongst
delever.
all-
That's
amongst all the
exactly what it is.
purchasers,
Yeah, it's to
which is
de-risk.
one big hit.
De-risk loans.
Well, if the developers start going and the banks start going, then we have a real big contagion emanating from this situation. So it's hard to know what the solution is. Hopefully, time heals. Mark, this has been very doom and gloom. On the positive side, tell me what you're seeing either in the future or talking about, we know it's going to get worse before it gets better, why you think it could get better, or what that could look like. Or if somebody is in a position to close and they're trying to hang on and make sense of why they should, versus get wrapped up in litigation and negotiations and exposures, like what is the
Where's the positive? I understand. You know, Ralph, it's so funny because I'm actually a very positive guy by nature, and I've gotten a bit of a reputation in the past couple of years of being doom and gloom. And truthfully, I actually don't feel doom and gloom about this experience in a substantive way, and in a very I'm a professor down at certain universities, and I've taught kids my whole life.
Did I leave that out of your bio?
It doesn't matter. Just that's the reality.
Yeah.
I do this. It is the case that you're watching kids graduate from school with $200,000 of debt. I'm talking law school, so graduate school, $200,000 worth of debt. They then graduate into an economy where they are expected to purchase a $1 million home. And then we all wonder why it is that they're getting married at 35 and our birth rates are falling, and why people are in an endless debt cycle till the day they die. Well, a huge reason for that is because real estate values, which are really your biggest purchase, have largely divorced themselves from Canadian income. The truth is that we're all going through hell, and every single person that I speak to is going through hell. And there are a lot of people who are going to go through bankruptcies and everything else, but it is for a larger purpose. And that larger purpose is the future that our children will be able to enjoy with more reasonable prices. We all believe that we benefit when real estate goes up. No, we do not. We do not. We have been doing it at the expense of our children. And the moment that we financialize the asset that we live in, that is to say, the asset that everyone requires in order to have a functional place, what you've done is you ensured that everyone's interests were in housing and housing alone, which stops them from exploring and opening up a coffee shop and becoming a Socratic professor of the university or anything else. And this is what gives vibrancy to our economy. But more importantly, this is what gives vibrancy to life. And what we've been doing is we have been foisting debt on future generations.
Yep.
This is an incredibly positive experience because it finally resets the table in favor of those people who most need it. Not me, not you, not my parents, but those people who are not yet in the market now have a fighting chance. And the worse this gets, the better it gets for them. We do not have similar interests, them and us. We have very contrary interests. And while I am trying to explain to you what it's like to be someone our age going through this with assets, if you just look at this from a bit of a younger perspective, I mean, realistically, we should be wearing party hats and having ice cream cake, which, by the way, is the only cake you should ever have. I don't know why. How is it that there are other cakes in the cake aisle at Loblaw? Can we have a whole show on this? Like, why in the world is every cake not an ice cream cake? Does that make any sense to you logically? I don't get it. Anyways, put that aside. I really want to be invited back on that show, by the way. And by the way, there's only three flavors that there should be, by the way, for the ice cream cake. Anyways, my point is, we should all be eating ice cream cakes and wearing party hats if, in fact, you're of a certain age. And that gives me a lot of hope for our long-term future in this country. And that gives me a lot of hope for And it means that the pain we're experiencing is for something tangible, real, and important. And that is a very positive way to end this.
Okay. Well, I don't know if I entirely agree with that outlook. I think we're going to see a situation where we really aren't going to be allowed to experience a recession. I think we're going to see government step in. I think we're going to see the money printer jump in. I think we're going to see more government debt. And think we're going to see a greater evisceration of the middle class. And so I wish I saw it as rosy and healing as what a recession entails. I just don't think that our current new government, especially, will allow that to happen. And I think we're just going to see more of the same. So I don't know if I entirely agree with that, but I do think that there are better days ahead. And I think we have to think that. And I think that this will pass. And I think that as long as you stay positive and you keep trying to add value and you keep trying to grow, that ultimately you'll make it through this, and hopefully brighter days are ahead for everybody. Because I do know that there are a lot of people out there who are suffering, not just from condos or financial duress, but mental duress. I speak to people every day, and this is really, really a tough time. And it seems like we're going through something societal, and it'll be really interesting to see where we end up on the other side of it, be it in 2 or 5 years from now.
I agree. And I think in a macro sense, we're not even talking about Canada or even North America. I think we're experiencing seismic global changes. And I think the world of 15 years from now, both on a technological basis, but also from a global power perspective and a whole range of other, I think we're just entering into a new world. Where we end up will be where will be dependent upon how we keep our heads, how we and the work that we're ready to put into our futures.
Awesome. Well, there you have it. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. Mark, where can people find you if they have any issues or just want to ask about their particular situations in real estate?
Well, I do spend a lot of time at the coffee shop right beside my office, so I'm just going to throw that out there. But if you're asking, like, on the internet, because that's where we spend all of our time, legalclosing.ca, legalclosing.ca. And of course, I would welcome anyone to give me a shout anytime. It's always a pleasure to speak. And know, as I said during my video, which I think you alluded to, you're not alone.
I think that's so important. I really, really do. In more than just real estate. Mark, thanks again. For anyone who's watching, I would be remiss, as I did forget at the beginning of this conversation, just to remind you to be sure to hit that like or subscribe button. If you have any questions for myself or Mark, please be sure to put them down below. And thank you so much for tuning in. And Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Ralph, before we get off, can I just say one last thing to your audience?
Sure.
I do a lot of these things. I speak to a lot of people. The people I enjoy to speak to most are those people I respect. And you and Corey are people who I've had the pleasure of dealing with now for over a year, maybe even 2. And I know you guys to be not only properly aligned in your values, but also your knowledge and your desire to understand what is transpiring in the markets is born of a desire to be a better professional. And I tremendously respect not only the opportunity to be on your show, but also the people who I've been speaking to for the past hour. I included Corey in this, even though she's not here on the show today. It means a lot. And people like you in our industry make us better for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. I'm going to clip this, and this will be my alarm that I'll wake up to every morning. So
all I'm really saying is your check cashed. That's it.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you. All right. Well, hopefully it cashed.
Have a good one.